How to master skills for the TOEFL iBT Listening Advanced. Unit 6. Understanding Organization. Sample iBT question. Listen to part of a lecture in a zoology class.
Now, you're probably aware that the Arctic is an extremely harsh environment and one of the coldest places on Earth. But let me remind you of what it's really like in the Arctic, especially in late December or early January. The temperature frequently drops below -40 degrees centigrade and sometimes gets even colder. Combine that with strong winds, little or no sunlight, and very little vegetation, and what you get is an environment in which very few species are capable of surviving. The polar bear, however, thrives in this kind of environment. The polar bear spends his time roaming throughout the Arctic, walking on land and ice, swimming in freezing seawater, and floating on sheets of ice while looking for seals, fish, and other food. Their favorite food is seals, which they find along the edges of the ice, in holes in the ice, and under cracks in the ice. They have no natural enemies in this environment, which is perfectly suited for them.
Question. Why does the professor mention the harsh Arctic environment? Practice with conversation. A. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor. Dr. Drexler, may I speak with you for a moment, please? You're not too busy right now, are you?
No, not at all, Adrian. Come into my office and have a seat. So, tell me, what's on your mind right now?
Well, you may or may not know this, but I'm applying to several different graduate schools, so I was hoping that you would be able to write a few letters of recommendation that I could send out along with my applications.
I'm honored that you've asked me, Adrian, and I'm more than happy to help you out. But don't you think you ought to ask Professor Smith instead? After all, he is your advisor, and he's the professor that you've worked with the longest in all of your years here. I would think that he would be able to write the best, most comprehensive letter of recommendation for you.
Yes, sir. You're absolutely right. The only problem is that I can't get in touch with Professor Smith at this moment. Apparently, he is still at that conference somewhere in Europe, and I don't know when he's coming back. I left him a couple voice messages, and I've emailed him several times, but he hasn't responded to any of them.
Yes, I can see how that would be a problem. I had forgotten that he was going to that conference. As far as I know, he won't be back until sometime next week. Are these letters urgent? If they can't wait until he gets back, I'd be more than happy to write them up for you.
Actually, all of my applications need to be submitted within the next couple of days. Friday, to be exact. So if you don't mind, I'd love for you to be able to write my recommendation letters for me.
Sure. I don't mind at all. But since you're not my advisee, I'm going to need to see your records. Do you think you could give me a copy of your resume as well as a comprehensive list of all the classes that you've taken in the physics department? That would be extremely helpful and enable me to write the best possible letter for you.
Oh, sure. I've got my resume on my computer, so I'll send that to you by email just as soon as I get back to my dorm room. And I'll provide a class list with the names of the professors I've taken and all the grades that I've received in them. Oh, and I'll send you the abstract for my senior research project so that you'll know exactly what I'm doing in the lab all the time.
Excellent. You know, I had no idea that you were planning to attend graduate school. What made you decide to do so?
Well, there are just so many fascinating things to study in the world of physics. I am just not ready to give up on the academic side of things and get a job in industry.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Are you going to be applying to our program?
Yes, sir. Actually, this school is first on my list. If I get accepted, I will definitely come here. I already know most of the teachers, and I'm really comfortable.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, I'd say your chances of getting in are pretty good, but I don't want to guarantee anything.
I understand completely. Well, I'm going to run back home and send you the files you need. Thanks a lot for your help.
Don't mention it. I'm just glad to help.
1. What can be inferred about the student? 2. What does the professor ask the student to send him? Choose 2 answers. 3. Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question. What does the professor imply when he says this?
I'm honored that you've asked me, Adrian, and I'm more than happy to help you out, but don't you think you ought to ask Professor Smith instead? After all, he is your advisor, and he's the professor that you've worked with the longest in all of your years here.
B. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a librarian.
Have you been taken care of?
No, I want to sign out a reserved article for Psych 420.
Sure. Could you give me the title of the article, please?
Modern Personality Theories. The professor is Jennifer Putman.
May I see your library card, please?
Here you are.
The computer's showing that you have a late fee.
That can't be right.
You can't sign out books or reserve articles if you still have a late fee pending. Just a minute. Okay. It says you signed out Every Woman's Guide to Weight Training. You signed it out on September 9th.
Yes, that's probably true, but I've already returned the book.
When?
I think it was a week ago.
Yes, you're right. It was exactly a week ago today, but a week ago today, which was last Tuesday, it was already a week overdue.
Come on, only a week, that's all?
Yes?
I don't have any money right now. How much is the fine?
$10.
$10? I don't have $10. Oh, I shouldn't have to pay $10.
Why not?
It's too much, and I'm a disabled student.
What do you mean disabled?
I have a hearing impairment. The university has to accommodate my disability.
Well, you're not making much sense. $10 is nothing. If you really need the use of the article, you may sign it out for an hour, but you'll have to pay $5 first.
What about my disability?
What about it?
I mean, maybe you can just let the fine slide this time. I promise I won't do this again.
Why did you return the book so late?
I was busy and didn't have time to come to the library.
I'm sorry, but I can't help you. Your disability has nothing to do with the reason why you returned the book late. And $10 is nothing.
Ah, you mean you're going to make me go find a bank machine just so I can withdraw $10 to pay the fine?
No, I'm just telling you that I can't loan you the article until you pay your fine.
I only need it for a minute.
That doesn't matter.
The book I borrowed wasn't important. It was just a weightlifting book, and there were probably several copies of it in the library.
No, that's our only copy, and all books here are treated with equal importance.
Oh, this is so ridiculous.
If you'd like, I can let you speak to the head librarian. She's in right now.
No, that's okay. Here's the money. Now give me the article.
Just a minute.
What now?
Your signature, please.
Here it is.
Thank you. Please return it within an hour.
Weren't you listening to me? I just told you I only need it for a minute. I'll be right back.
1. Why does the librarian mention that all books are treated equally in the library? 2. According to the librarian, what must the student do before she can check out the article she needs? 3. What is the librarian's opinion of the student's disability? C. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor Sabharwal, I need to talk to you about something.
Oh, please come into my office, young man. How might I help you?
Yes, I'm in your quantum physics class and looked at my grade. I think you must have made some kind of mistake when you calculated it.
Nonsense, young man. I never make mistakes with grades.
Really?
Ha ha ha. No, not at all. I must admit, from time to time I do make errors. What makes you think there's an error?
Well, you gave us a spreadsheet with our updated grades, right? And right now my score is 72, which should be impossible because on the midterm exam I got 85, and on the quiz I got 90. So I think my score should be about 86.
Oh, goodness. Let me take a look at your scores. Just a minute, please. Why don't you sit down? I'll need a minute just to locate the file. Aha! I got it. What is your student number?
It's 20061187.
Please say that again more slowly, please.
It's 20061187.
I'm sorry, I can't seem to find it. I'm really sorry. Could you please say it one more time?
Sure, it's 20061187.
This is very strange. Very, very, very strange. I can't find you. You're not on my list. It's as if you don't exist.
Well, I'm in your morning class every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m.
Oh, I believe you, and I remember you. But I just can't seem to find you. Did you say Tuesday and Thursday at 10?
Yes.
Oops, I'm looking at the wrong file. Just a minute. It's 20061187, right?
Yes.
Okie dokie, I got it. Your midterm exam was 85 and you got a 90 on your quiz. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to tell you. My midterm was 85 and I got 90 on the quiz.
Well, you're doing very well. And you're right, I did make a mistake. Your score should be 86 right now. That's a good score. It's one of the highest in the class.
So you'll change my grade, right?
Yes, of course. I'm really sorry I caused you such an inconvenience. Next time, if you have any problems, just call me, okay? You don't have to come all the way down here. You can even talk to me about it during class time. I don't mind. And don't hesitate to ask me any questions in class.
Okay, but I didn't have to go out of my way or anything.
Well, I'm truly sorry. I did the grades late at night, probably well past my bedtime. I hope I didn't make many other mistakes like that, and thank you for bringing this to my attention.
It's no problem. Thanks for your help.
No. I thank you.
Okay. See you next Tuesday.
Okay, I'd better check with the other students in case I made more mistakes like that. In any event, have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
1. Why does the professor mention that he stayed up past his bedtime? 2. According to the professor, what is the position of the student's grade in the class? 3. Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question. Nonsense, young man. I never make mistakes with grades.
Really?
Ha ha ha. No, not at all. I must admit, from time to time I do make errors. What makes you think there's an error? What is the professor's attitude in this part of the conversation? D. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a librarian.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I think that my books are almost due, so I'd like to renew them if that's possible. I don't have to bring them here to the library to do that, do I?
Oh no, of course you don't have to do that. Just let me see your student ID card and I can call up your record on the screen.
You have no idea how much of a relief it is to hear those words come out of your mouth. I've got a ton of books checked out, so lugging them up here wouldn't be too fun. Here's my card.
Okay, let's take a look. Your name is Jason Stevens, right? And you have, wow, that's a lot of books you have checked out. 35 in total? You must be some kind of a bookworm.
Not really. It's just that I have this upcoming report due in one of my classes, so I'm trying to do as much research as I can. Oh, so when are the books due now?
They aren't due until November 29th. That's 4 weeks from today, so you should have plenty of time to finish everything up by then.
Excellent. You've been quite a lot of help. Say, I have a question for you if you don't mind. I've been trying to find this book. It's really crucial to my research, but it appears to have been checked out by someone. If it's not too much of a problem, do you think that you could check to see if it's actually been returned yet?
Oh, of course, I don't mind at all. That's exactly what I'm here for. Why don't you give me the title of the book so that I can call it up onto the screen?
Sure, I can do that. The title of the book is Exploring New Methods in Historiography.
I didn't know that there were any new methods in history, but I guess that you're the expert, huh?
Yeah, it's not exactly the most fascinating topic in the world, but without it, I don't know what I'll do. I guess that I'd have to purchase it from a bookstore, but considering that it costs around $50, I'd much rather check it out instead. So, what's the verdict on the book?
I'd have to say that today is your lucky day. It appears that whoever had it checked out just returned it to the library. Here's the call number for the book. Let me write it down for you. Now, here's something you need to keep in mind. Since it just got returned, it might not have been shelved yet. Why don't you head down to the stacks and take a look? If it's not where it should be, come back up here and I'll go find it in the returned book section.
Wow, that is some seriously awesome news. Thanks a lot.
You don't have to thank me. I'm just doing my job.
1. Why does the librarian mention the returned book section? 2. Why does the student go to speak with the librarian? 3. What is the librarian's attitude toward the student? Practice with lectures. A. Listen to part of a lecture in an economy class.
So, what is free trade?
Free trade means no tariffs and no quotas between countries that trade goods with one another.
Good answer. But it's not only a free flow of goods, it also means the free flow of services between nations. It's a system that allows people to buy and sell whatever they desire with whomever they desire. Advocates argue that total free trade will result in a net gain in wealth for both trading partners. Some of the characteristics of free trade are let me list them for you. First, the absence of tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods and services. Second is the absence of quotas and other trade barriers. Third, the free flow of labor between two trading partners. Fourth, the free flow of capital between the two trading partners. And fifth is the absence of subsidies and regulations on locally produced goods and services that give businesses in the home country an advantage over those of a foreign country. Now, having said all this, keep in mind that free trade is a relatively loose term that means different things to different people. For instance, it can be any combination of these characteristics I just mentioned to you, and typically it's never completely 100% free. When you have a free trade agreement between two countries, there are usually some protective policies in place. Protectionism, on the other hand, means government restraint on trade between two nations. Protective trade or protective tariffs are a nation's efforts to prevent its own people from trading. Such protective measures include tariffs on imported goods and services, restrictive quotas on imported goods and services, government regulations which discourage imports, anti-dumping laws, and subsidies for local producers. There are a number of advantages to free trade. Perhaps the most important advantage of free trade is that it lowers the costs of goods and services. This is possible for a number of reasons. For example, production can take place in nations where labor and other operating costs are lower. Nike might manufacture in developing nations where labor costs are much cheaper. Likewise, it allows cheaper foreign manufactured goods from foreign businesses easily to be imported into a country where manufacturers cannot produce goods as cheaply. An example would be garment manufacturers in China. Also, jobs can be outsourced to other countries where labor is much cheaper. This explains why a lot of telephone call centers are located in India. So, with free trade, consumers can pay lower prices for foreign manufactured goods or foreign services rather than pay higher costs to a local high-cost producers. Free trade also attracts investors to developed nations, improving the economies of those nations. It allows corporations easily to operate across borders, and it also results in social advantages, such as the spread of democratic ideas to developed nations and the reduction of the likelihood of war between developed nations. Despite its apparent advantages, there are a number of critics of free trade. Many people prefer protectionism. And, as I mentioned a moment ago, in the real world, even when we have free trade or a free trade agreement, there's still some protectionism. Protectionists feel it's better for local consumers to pay higher prices and thereby maintain quality jobs. So protectionism protects business, jobs, and wages, but it also means higher prices.
1. How does the professor organize the lecture? 2. Which is least likely to be true about free trade? 3. What is the likely outcome of adopting protectionist policies? B. Listen to part of a lecture in an art class.
Before we get into details about the art of photography and discuss the mechanics of cameras, I want to give you a brief history of some of the major events in the development of photography so that you'll have a greater appreciation for the art and technology that we have today. You might have already read in your textbooks that in the 4th and 5th centuries BC, philosophers in China and Greece described the basic principles of cameras. Now, this might not seem like a big deal because they were still far from inventing a camera, but what is of particular interest here is that they were already familiar with the basic principles of optics. In the 1660s, Isaac Newton discovered that white light was actually composed of different colors. By this time, darkrooms had already existed as a tool to assist in drawings. Then in 1727, we get our first important chemical discovery. Johann Heinrich Schultz discovered that exposure to light would darken silver nitrate. Finally, in 1814, a Frenchman, Joseph Nicephore Niepce, became the first person to create a photographic image. However, his discovery wasn't a very practical one because his image needed to be exposed to light for at least 8 hours. And more importantly, the image quickly faded. However, after this, the development of photography quickly snowballed, and within a generation, we had what very closely resembled modern-day photography. Niepce died in 1833, but his business partner, Louis Daguerre, continued to experiment. Finally, in 1837, Daguerre performed possibly the greatest or most important feat in the history of photography when he became the first successfully to capture an image that did not fade. In other words, this was the first permanent image. He accomplished this by immersing the image in salt. Also, he developed photographic plates, which significantly reduced the required exposure time to 30 minutes. As a result of this, many artists at that time felt that this would seriously jeopardize their livelihoods, and some predicted that painting would cease to exist. In 1841, William Henry Talbot developed the first negative-positive process, which made it possible to have multiple copies of the same image. But exposure times still took 3 to 15 minutes. Modern-day photography is based on the same principles that he used. Finally, in 1851, Frederick Scott Archer invented the collodion process, in which images only required a few seconds of light exposure. This was also cheaper and therefore made it possible for most middle-class people to have their portraits done. The first mass-market camera was sold in 1900. It was called the Brownie. In 1913, the first 35mm still camera was developed, and then in 1927, General Electric invented the first modern flashbulb. Polaroid cameras were first marketed in 1948. In 1973, instant cameras were introduced, and then in the mid-1980s, we had the arrival of digital cameras.
1. How does the professor organize the lecture? 2. Who was the first to make multiple copies of the same image? 3. Which of the following statements can be inferred from the lecture? C. Listen to part of a lecture in an archaeology class.
I'm glad you've all done your reading assignment. So now, perhaps someone can remind us what archaeology is about.
Well, according to what we have read, it's a science which studies ancient cultures and past human activities.
And how do we study these ancient activities?
Well, the ancients left little or no written history, but archaeologists can learn a lot by examining ancient remains, such as buildings, tools, graves, artifacts, and stuff like that. They use these to reconstruct the past.
Yes, and these remains are our chief source of knowledge of prehistoric and ancient cultures. Where do archaeologists get their information?
They get it by digging.
Yes, they excavate the ground. Usually, this means digging a big hole. They expose, process, and record the remains of each archaeological site. One kind of archaeology is rescue archaeology, which is sometimes referred to in your readings as salvage archaeology or preventative archaeology. Rescue archaeology is the survey and excavation of areas of archaeological interest that have recently been revealed and are threatened by land development or construction. Usually, development is imminent, so archaeologists must urgently excavate so that they don't impede the developers. In other words, they have to rescue the site before the bulldozers move in. These archaeologists have to operate with tight deadlines. This means they need to record the details of the remains quickly. The actual field work is conducted by an army of mobile professional archaeologists who are skilled in this type of work. Rescue archaeology is more common in cities because that's normally where ancient civilizations were located and where the remains lie. It's also where development usually occurs. The bulldozer is not the only concern for rescuers. Many sites have suffered a lot of erosion, which adds to the peril of the situation. This is another reason for the urgent need to rescue. The excavation becomes an exercise in damage control, where the team tries to limit the amount of damage that has or will inevitably occur. We call this damage control.
Is there always such an urgency to excavate? Don't they ever take their time?
Oh, of course. What I described were the urgent cases. Often there is no emergency or deadlines, so they indeed have a lot more time and can examine things more closely. We call this research excavation. During research excavation, the archaeologists have a lot more resources to assist in their work. They can work at a relaxed pace and they can excavate more fully. Time is simply not of the essence. Usually, the people working on such sites are the academics and private societies who have sufficient labor and funding.
So where does excavation occur?
Right now, as we speak, there are thousands of digs taking place all over the world.
But I mean, are there any near here?
No, not around here, not in this state.
So where are all the excavations occurring?
Well, surprisingly, despite their size, there are not many excavation sites in Canada and the U.S. In fact, right now, Mexico has more digs than anywhere else in the Americas. The countries where extensive ancient civilizations were located tend to have more archaeological sites. In the Americas, Mexico and Peru have the most excavations, but at any given time, you would likely find a lot of digging in places like Iran, Egypt, Greece, and Italy. Ah, a good example would be Pompeii, the ancient Roman city that was destroyed by a volcano in 79 AD. It was rediscovered in 1748, and ever since that time, a lot of excavations have been going on there, even as we speak.
1. How does the professor organize the lecture? 2. According to the professor, what is one way that land development can affect archaeological sites? 3. How is the discussion organized? D. Listen to part of a lecture in an art class.
So, we've discussed and looked at architecture, sculptures, and a number of paintings. Are there any other art forms?
Yeah, we didn't discuss literature yet.
Nor have we discussed ceramic arts. A lot of art students are not interested in this art form because they don't see it as being glamorous. But I think it does deserve some of our attention. What exactly is ceramics?
It's made from clay. It's things like mugs, cups, plates, pots, tiles, and I think bricks too.
Yes, generally ceramic arts, which are sometimes referred to as pottery, are pieces made from a combination of inorganic non-metallic materials and heat. In other words, it's earthenware. And indeed, the most common ingredient is clay, but it's usually mixed with various minerals. Typically, pottery is something you've been using your entire life. I mean, it's usually kitchenware and various other kinds of containers. It usually has utilitarian purposes, and sometimes it's designed purely for decorative reasons. Because of its practicality and durability, it's probably the oldest form of art. Many pieces date back several thousand years to the age of prehistoric man. Early man had little time for decorative art, but developed pots primarily for practical reasons. Imagine drinking water all these centuries without cups or eating without plates.
How do they make it look so refined? What you see in the stores and museums hardly looks like clay.
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. First, much of the kitchenware that you see in stores is mass-produced in factories. But making beautiful, refined-looking pottery is not difficult. Many pots are made in old-fashioned, modest studios, as they were hundreds of years ago. And they're made by hand. Potters might use a potter's wheel, but that's all. The potter starts with a hunk of clay, shapes it with his hands, and then lays it out to dry. Later, the potter heats it up in an oven, which we call a kiln. This hardens the clay. Once it's heated, the shape becomes permanent and can no longer be modified. This is why pottery is so indurable. Pots are usually heated at an extremely high temperature, which varies with the purpose. Sometimes the pots are heated twice, but they're always glazed before the final firing, which gives them that refined look and makes it non-porous. Also, when painters use pots or plates as a canvas and devote a lot of attention and detail to the design, that works wonders too.
So, how high do the pots have to be heated?
Well, as I said, that depends on the purpose of the art form. If the temperature is heated to more than 1200 degrees Celsius, it will essentially turn the clay into man-made stone. We call this stoneware. It's hard enough to resist scratching. A lot of fancy plates are made this way, and with the touch of a skilled painter, they can be made to look very beautiful. There are other types of pottery, such as earthenware and porcelain. Earthenware is heated below 1200 degrees.
1. How does the professor begin his lecture? 2. According to the professor, where is most kitchenware produced? 3. What can be inferred from the lecture? Integrated listening and speaking. A. Listen to a different version of the previous lecture and say the answers out loud.
As I mentioned to you, there will be a number of questions about free trade and protectionism on next week's exam, so keep in mind that free trade is basically the free flow of goods and services between nations. Usually this means the absence of tariffs, quotas, subsidies, and restrictive regulations which limit the flow of business between two nations. Protectionism is the government restraining trade between two nations. It is basically the opposite of free trade and includes such protective measures as tariffs, quotas, government regulations, anti-dumping laws, and subsidies. One major advantage of free trade is that it keeps prices down, but at the same time it can hurt domestic businesses and reduce domestic wages. Protectionism protects domestic businesses, domestic jobs, and domestic wages while keeping prices higher.
1. How would you describe free trade? 2. Which type of trade is more likely to result in higher domestic prices? 3. What are the advantages of protectionism? B. Listen to a different version of the previous lecture and say the answers out loud. Ceramic arts or pottery are items that are made from various natural ingredients like clay or other minerals. Most pottery has a practical use like for bowls and plates. So how do we make pottery? Well, if doing so by hand, first, the potter uses a potter's wheel to mold a piece of clay into the shape he wants. Then he lets it dry, and after that he bakes it in an oven called a kiln. When the clay is heated, it hardens, thereby making its shape permanent. After that, the pot is done. Of course, sometimes the potter heats it again, but not before glazing the pot. That's a process which gives pots that nice look that most of them have. It sounds like a difficult process, but it's really not that hard at all. 1. What do people often use pottery for? 2. What are the steps to making a pot? 3. What does glazing do? TOEFL iBT practice test. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a clerk. Excuse me, do you work here?
Oh, sure. What can I do for you?
I'm looking for the law books.
Laws in Section G, over there.
I was just there. I saw only a few books there.
I know. Most of the law books are sold directly from the law school. Which book were you looking for?
Principles of European Business Law.
Oh, sorry. We're not carrying that one anymore.
That can't be right. Are you sure?
Just a minute. Let me look on the computer. You said Principles of European Business Law, right?
Yep.
The author is Roman Picard?
That's it.
Yeah, I'm afraid we don't have it.
I need it for one of my courses.
Are you a law student?
No, I'm in business.
Well, the semester is half over. Why are you looking for it now?
I know, but I didn't have time to read it yet, so I didn't bother buying it. The midterm exam is next week, so now I have to read it.
Our shelf space is very limited, so often 4 or 5 weeks into a semester, we send unsold books back to our supplier or directly to the publisher, especially if the textbook is not required for the next semester. This one's probably not required next semester.
Yeah, you're right. This course is offered next semester, but I think it's with a different professor, and he'll probably use a different textbook.
Perhaps you could find it in the library. From my understanding, the university is required to put 1 copy of each textbook in the library.
I didn't know that, but I prefer to buy a copy. This way I can mark it up. Can you order another copy?
No, not just for one student.
Well, what should I do?
Why don't you ask your professor to contact us? We can order single copies for professors. Maybe he'd be willing to cooperate.
Okay, but he's out of town today, and I'm not sure when he's coming back. Are there any other options?
Well, law books are usually difficult to find. You'd never find them in a regular bookstore. You could check some other universities that have law schools, but unfortunately, they probably don't use the same textbook. I have a thought. The book was used last year, so you might be able to find a copy of it at one of the used bookstores.
Oh, good idea. I didn't think of that.
Yes, there are 2 used bookstores on campus. O'Hara's is in the student building, and there's also Bargain Books, which is next door to us.
Okay, are there any other used bookstores on campus?
No, but it wouldn't hurt to check out Spider Books. It's just a block south of campus, and it carries a lot of used textbooks from this university. It's the biggest used bookshop in the city.
Okay, and if that doesn't work, are there any other alternatives?
Yeah, just do what my sister and a lot of her friends are doing.
What's that?
They're buying a lot of their textbooks online. Check the online bookstores. Check Amazon and eBay. They've got just about everything, including textbooks. And they ship things very quickly.
Oh, good idea. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Good luck.
1. According to the student, why didn't he buy this book earlier in the semester? 2. According to the clerk, how can limited shelf space affect their stock of books? 3. Listen again to part of the conversations, then answer the question. What can be inferred from the woman's statements?
They're buying a lot of their textbooks online. Check the online bookstores. Check Amazon and eBay. They've got just about everything, including textbooks. And they ship things very quickly.
4. Why does the clerk mention his sister? 5. What will the student probably do next? Listen to part of a lecture in a zoology class.
So, for these reasons, when you're camping, be sure you take all of the necessary precautions to avoid bear encounters.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
This winter, I'll be going camping. It'll be the first time I've ever tried winter camping. I was wondering, since bears usually hibernate during the winter, do we still have to take the same precautions as when we go camping in the summer?
Yes. First of all, you don't know when bears are going to start hibernating, and you don't know when they're going to stop hibernating. And most importantly, bears don't hibernate.
Oh, really?
Yes, really. The stories you were told as a child about bears hibernating are not true. Bears are not true hibernators. Let me repeat that. Bears don't hibernate. True hibernation essentially means total inactivity for several days or weeks. It's a state or a phase that some animals experience when the days become very short, the temperature cools, and food quantities are limited. Furthermore, there are different kinds of hibernators. True hibernation is also referred to as deep hibernation because the animal's body is inactive for a very long period. Its body temperature decreases to 5 degrees or less, its metabolism decreases, and its breathing slows down. True hibernation is a survival mechanism during the long, cold winter season when food is scarce. Deep hibernation allows the animal to conserve its energy. Their sleep is so deep that they cannot be awakened. This allows animals to skip over the cold, stressful winter. Bears are not true hibernators. They can awaken during the winter. Please remember that.
Ah, so what happens to bears during the winter?
Well, bears are torpor hibernators. This means they are not true hibernators like some smaller animals. Torpor hibernators are inactive only for a short time, perhaps during the coldest hours of the night. They don't sleep for several weeks like true hibernators, and their temperature never drops to 5 degrees. In fact, bears' temperatures rarely drop below 30 degrees. When an animal is in torpor, it's capable of quick arousal. Some bears will sleep for several weeks, but even if they do, they are capable of waking up very quickly. That's why bears are dangerous all year round.
How do animals know when to hibernate?
Well, some hibernators, like reptiles, are capable of predictive dormancy, which means that as the days decrease in length, they can anticipate winter approaching, and then they begin hibernating automatically. Because they can anticipate cold weather, they can avoid the potentially lethal cold season by going into hibernation. Other animals are not capable of this anticipation. They're only capable of consequential dormancy. In other words, they don't hibernate until they've been exposed to cold weather. If the winter is mild or the animal is located in an area where the seasonal weather conditions are unpredictable, it might stay active all winter if conditions permit. If it gets too cold, it can start hibernating.
So, which animals are deep hibernators?
Some of the deep hibernators are chipmunks, woodchucks, snakes, box turtles, and toads. Torpor hibernators include bears, raccoons, and skunks. The non-hibernators are red foxes, gray squirrels, and wild turkeys.
1. How did the professor organize the lecture? 2. According to the professor, how do some hibernators practice predictive dormancy? 3. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
Some of the deep hibernators are chipmunks, woodchucks, snakes, box turtles, and toads. Torpor hibernators include bears, raccoons, and skunks. The non-hibernators are red foxes, gray squirrels, and wild turkeys.
What can be inferred about the professor's comment? 4. In the course of the lecture, the professor mentions both torpor and deep hibernators. Which of the following animals are torpor hibernators and which are deep hibernators? 5. What is the main topic of the lecture? 6. What is true hibernation?